Today, I'm excited to introduce a friend of mine, Rikki Ash of Rikki Ash Consulting. This episode is actually a little different than my other episodes. I did not script anything, nothing was prepared because I really just wanted to have an open, meaningful, real conversation with Rikki today because she's so good at that. The topic that I was really interested in covering with Rikki is finding fulfillment through your job. If you're listening to this, you probably work or you're thinking of starting a business. And yes, there are major financial goals that come with that. But I would love to talk about the piece that really is the most important, which is feeling fulfilled through what you do. If you're going to spend your life doing something, I think it should be all about fulfillment. And my branding mantra, what I do, my business, if you go to my homepage, it says run a business with fulfillment and joy. And I really stand by that and creating that for anyone I work with. And if you're listening to this, I want you to know that there's more out there for you. You can love what you do, even if you don't actually love the work, but you can find fulfillment through it. So, Rikki, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Michelle.
I'm so excited to have you here. First of all, let's talk about you and what you do because I'm so into it and I think listeners will be very intrigued. You are very interested in logotherapy and you are a logoanalytic life coach. Did I get that right?
Yes. So I'll be honest, first and foremost, I'm really an educator. I'm in high school education. I've been teaching high school girls for 7 years now. And I'll talk about fulfillment in that career and that goal, which, is definitely high up there. But I also really enjoy helping women, post high school. And this is sort of a niche that I found myself into. And that, when I discovered logotherapy.
What inspired you to pursue logotherapy? Like, what about it was like, yes, this is something I want to learn more about, especially someone as an educator? Like, did you see that as something that you can use to help teenage girls?
I didn't look for logotherapy. I didn't try to find it. It kind of found me. It got into me. Like I didn't get into it. It got into me. I had the opportunity. My grandfather was sick 2.5 years ago. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and he lived in Canada. He was a rabbi there for 50 years. And when he was diagnosed, he came to New York to be closer to his family. I actually was privileged to be 5 minutes away from him for the whole time he was sick, which was around 6 months. And I interviewed him about his life so I can kind of get, information and put together a book. And one of the themes that kept running through his life was this idea of finding meaning. And not only that, but he actually had a personal relationship with Viktor Frankl, who is, sort of the spearhead of the meaning movement. He is, he wrote Man's Search for Meaning. He was the one who developed logotherapy. And so I was introduced to all these books that I didn't even know my grandfather wrote, actually with
Wow.
Viktor Frankl about logotherapy. And I really didn't plan to get into it. I just was like, was a huge part of my grandfather's life. I can't leave it out of the book. So I really told the story of his life through the lens of logotherapeutic ideas. And then one thing led to another. I ended up getting in touch somehow with Viktor Frankl's grandson, firstly, really just to ask permission to use Viktor Frankl's like writings in the book.
Wow.
And then, he ended up sending me a course, and I was like, okay, like if you're sending me a course, I'm going to take it. And I'm like, wow, this is really good stuff. Like I originally was just trying to learn for research purposes. And then I decided, wow, this is some good stuff. And it really works.
I'm curious if you've implemented something specific where you saw results. Was there something that you gained from learning logotherapy where you said, let me try this, and you saw something come out of that?
Yeah, I would definitely say I've applied it. Um, so I think it's a lot about, right? There's this idea that Viktor Frankl says you're not creating meaning somewhere that it doesn't exist. Everywhere in the world, there's meaning to be found, there's meaning to discover. And so it really comes down to shifting a perspective. So even let's say in motherhood, you can be, I could be, let's say, in a frustrated mode. You come home after a long day of work, let's say, and you have that 2 hours before bedtime or whatever it is, like the hardest hours of the night for many. And there's a lot of ways you can look at that, right? You can look at that with an eye for like, oh my gosh, this is exhausting. This is annoying. Like, I just need to get my kids to bed. I just need to get through. I just need to get through dinner. I just need to get through bedtime. I just need to get through. Then I'll be able to like take a deep breath, which I'm not going to lie, happens to me often.
Happens to me too every day.
Yeah.
I
But
can relate.
yeah, for sure. But then I think when you have that shift for a moment of, wait, okay, this is something I want to find meaning in. How do I find meaning in this relationship with my children at this moment? Right. And it could be something really simple. Just even having a broader idea in mind and then kind of utilizing it in a simple way. So I'll give you an example, right? Let's say this is something that happened to me. I went out for dinner with my father and it was so beautiful. It was so nice. It was like a few weeks ago. And I saw a quote like soon after, and it said something like, your relationship with your parents as an adult really has a lot to do with how you're parented as a child, right? The fact that like you can be close with your adult children and they don't owe you anything and they still want to talk to you, that's a testament to your parenting. And so that to me was like, hey, that's something I want with my children when they're adults. So I almost had this like shift of, in the little moments that I'm having trouble, let me think like that. Okay, this is a little mini moment that we could have fun together. So instead of me being like dreadful of the 2 hours left, let me turn on some music and dance with my kids and maybe they'll remember that, and that's like a good positive memory and like it builds the skills for the relationship. So I guess the idea of using this idea of finding meaning in the small moments, and maybe that's having a larger picture of why a certain thing in your life is meaningful, but you also have to apply that moment by moment. You can't just have this lofty idea. It has to be, in the
It's
zone.
it's very intentional and it's a lot of work. It's something that I've been working on over the last couple of years. I think my epiphany came a couple, like I would say it's been 2 years now. Especially when I rebranded my business. The reason why I rebranded and, kind of like just set these big goals was because I was feeling unfulfilled. And I really hit a wall where I was like, if I'm going to keep working and hating what I'm doing and hating the mornings and waking up unhappy, then what am I doing all this for? What's the point? And I went years and years like this until recently where I was like, where can I find fulfillment in this? And even in my day to day, it's not just work. I mean, I want to get to work shortly, but we'll get into that. But it's really like you said, the moments with your children, the moments with your husband, the moments with your parents, like how can we take these moments and make them full of meaning? It doesn't happen to you. I think a lot of people wait for that change to happen to them. It's a moment of, I'm going to change the way I react to things. I'm going to change the way I see things. And like you said, shift my perspective. It has to be done intentionally. Otherwise, it's not going to happen for you.
You have to think about it. Well,
Yeah.
and that's all it takes. It's really just thought, but
Yes.
you have to think for sure.
So I'm curious what that journey could look like for people. I could talk about my personal journey. One of it is that my life became challenging when we discovered that my son was special needs and got that diagnosis that he's on the spectrum. So for me, that was like I'm facing a challenge, and the only way I can get up every day happy and excited and find meaning in this is to find it and not wait for like a miracle or a magical moment, or, like I could have sat around and I could have reacted very differently to it. Um, but I chose meaning. I chose fulfillment,
Wow.
and I really wanted to just see the good in it, find gratitude in it. Gratitude is something I've been working on very much. Is there any correlation between logotherapy and gratitude? Is there a tie between those two? I'm
Well,
curious.
I guess the tie, I actually tried to like look into this. I didn't find any like direct quotes necessarily, but I think gratitude is very much tied with meaning, with, finding meaning, because that's one of the ways, right? There's three ways that you find meaning in life. One is through your creative values. So one is through what you create. So this one might not have directly correlation with gratitude, um, but the next one does. The next one is experiential values, things that you experience in the world, right? A gorgeous sunset, or like going to a park, or just nature, or even the experience of love and experiencing another person. And that really should overwhelm you with a feeling of gratitude. Like when you have a conversation with a friend and you leave that conversation like with your heart kind of warm and fuzzy and you feel like that was such a good conversation, that's the reason it feels meaningful is because it was an experiential value that you were grateful for, you know? So I do think that our experiences in life, if we are conscious of them
Yeah.
and we are aware of them while they're happening and we are grateful for them, then we can totally find meaning in them. Okay, so the third value is called attitudinal values. And that's basically when, you know, you don't have a choice. There's nothing to create at this moment. There's nothing to experience. You have a moment of challenge, of suffering, of difficulty. Your only option at that point is your attitude and finding meaning in the attitude that you choose. So even like in your example with your son, that's really, it's not something you could like fix with something creative like you were saying. There's no magic moment or whatever, and it's not necessarily something that you can always have an experience to rectify. It's also something that sometimes is just a challenge, and it's about choosing your attitude. And you know, it's how we react to suffering. And there's this quote, I love to share this quote, right? Suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. And when suffering doesn't have a meaning, it leads to despair very often. But when suffering does have a meaning, then yes, you could still be stressed. You can still be sad. There's nothing, logotherapy is not into this business of like, you should always be so perfectly happy and even and like maintain homeostasis. Really, like it embraces all the whole spectrum of human emotion. And you're supposed to be sometimes happy, sometimes sad. You don't always have to be perfect. And those feelings of sadness or guilt or whatever it is should actually lend itself to a change, right? And part of logotherapy, a huge part of it is this idea of responsibility, that we have responsibility as human beings to, you know, rectify relationships, things like that. So our attitudes are a choice. It's not that we have to be happy all the time. You know, like Viktor Frankl, though he created logotherapy before World War II, and he kind of had to test his theory, unfortunately, throughout the Holocaust. So when he got the one of the first concentration camps, a Nazi officer actually took away his manuscript to the first book that he was writing, or one of the first books, which is actually in English called The Doctor and the Soul. It came before Man's Search for Meaning. And he like asked, can you not take my life's work, right? And they were like, no, we're taking it, obviously. And he actually writes that at times when he had typhus, when he had really terrible fever, when he was really not feeling like he was getting out of that hellhole, really no other word for it,
Yeah.
he said to himself, you know, like he started rewriting his manuscript in his head. And that kind of started getting him through. So even though he couldn't actually create, he couldn't actually experience, but he sort of had to have an attitude shift of like, okay, I'm going to work on, I mean, maybe in a sense it's like a somewhat creative value, but in another sense it's an attitudinal value because he's choosing to have this attitude of I'm going to get out, I'm going to
Right.
have this hope, I'm going to make it through, I'm writing this so that it's going to come out when I get out. And it's true, when he got out he did write it, and he didn't even intend to write Man's Search for Meaning. He only wrote it because people wanted to hear more about his Holocaust experience. And he was so upset that it was such a bestseller because he was like, why is everyone missing meaning in their lives? Like he was not happy about that.
Right.
He really wished it wouldn't have sold so well, actually. So fascinating.
I find it to be such a common thing that people are looking for these days. I think it's why I position my business that way. It's because, you know, everyone's seeking purpose, fulfillment nowadays. Um, why do you think it's such a prevalent issue today? Why is it that we're so, do you think it's because of lockdown for a year and a half, or like why are we scrambling for meaning right now?
So it's a good question. I always feel like when I think about right now, I always feel like, okay, people of all time said, why are we feeling this right now? So, like, is it specific to 2023? It could be. But see, what happens is before Viktor Frankl came along, I'm sure most of the listeners have heard of Sigmund Freud. He's a pretty famous psychologist. His idea was that the drive of a human being was pleasure. Everything was about pleasure. And then along came another psychologist, also pretty famous, Alfred Adler, and he said it's all about dominance, it's all about power. And to be honest, these things are true in a sense, right? We are driven somewhat by pleasure. We want to have an enjoyable, good life. And we are somewhat driven by, you know, obviously dominance in a sense, like sometimes you choose a position, and we can get into the job thing soon, right? Like sometimes you choose a position or you choose to go do a certain thing because you want to feel powerful, you want to feel in control, you want to feel respected in your position, you want to feel like people respect you, you want to feel empowered. And it's true. I think what it comes down to, and maybe it's more prevalent in today's day, is that there's so much opportunity for pleasure, right? You can numb your brain with pleasure and TV and whatever it is. There's so much opportunity for dominance and power. And those often do drive human behavior, but they don't lead to fulfillment. And it's Viktor Frankl who came and said, well, the real will, the drive of a human being really has to be is the will to meaning. And not everybody discovers that early on enough. Maybe someone waits till they have a midlife crisis to discover that, unfortunately. But, Viktor Frankl mostly works, honestly, with suicidal patients. And he would ask, and this is a very intense question, but he said to clients that did not have suicidal ideation, he would say, why do you not want to commit suicide? And they would
Wow.
say, they would share their thoughts. And no one says like, because I want to watch more Netflix, not that Netflix is around there, but most people, when you think about that question, it leads you into what you find fulfilling and meaningful in your life, at least somewhat. So I
Right.
think in today's day, there's so much numbing we can do to our brains, and we're driven somewhat by this pleasure, by power, and things like that. And then when that comes to bite us, when we're like overload, and then we sort of look at ourselves and we're accomplishing so much, right? We're getting to the next level, we're dominating, we're the best in our office, we are like doing amazing, we're making as much money as we ever wanted to make, whatever it is that we're doing, and somehow we don't feel fulfilled. Why is that, right? So I
Yeah.
think now we have so much opportunity for pleasure, opportunity for dominance, all of this, but that's not what I believe, or what Viktor Frankl believed to that drives human behavior or human motivation, moreover. So
Rikki,
I
I
don't know,
really
maybe
I
that's why.
really think you hit the nail on the head though, because, I see it for myself and I see it with so many people around me. It's true. Like everything's so accessible these days. And this is true of not just, psychology, but like when it's like the spoiled kid syndrome. I just made up a syndrome, but like where you have everything, what's left, you know? And
100%.
I think it always comes back to meaning being the thing we realize we need the most. It's like a wake-up call. We're like, we have it all. Now what's next? What's left? Like someone who's like, oh, if I just got that raise, they get the raise. They're like, why am I still unhappy? It's like this chase and not finding what it is we truly need. But the search for meaning, I think, is when you allow meaning to come into your life and you actively seek it out and find it, there's nothing like it. And
100%.
right, it's like just something that we need. It's a necessity because you can't go through life happy. You can't go through life feeling good or proud or you can't enjoy things unless you truly get fulfillment out of it.
A lot of times, a job for a lot of people becomes a job, and
Yeah.
they forget. And the truth is, a lot of studies show that just throwing money at the problem, if someone's unhappy at work and you just give them more money, that's often not going to solve the problem. It's
Yeah.
not going to make them happier. Of course, people want to feel appreciated, and money can do that to a certain extent. But that's not necessarily, people might think that they're hungry for more money at a job. Money isn't the thing that's going to make people happy at a job or feel fulfilled. To a certain extent, you need to like have some level of comfortability and ability to live. And then I think at a certain point it levels off, and you need the meaning, you need the fulfillment.
Totally. It's why I don't promise my clients riches. Like I don't tell people I'll help you make sales and get rich, which I do. That's part of the promise, but the promise is I want you to feel good about this. I want you to live your life's purpose through the business that you create. Okay, so I guess now we're here. We've covered logotherapy. We've gotten into that like real deep, meaningful conversation about finding fulfillment. So now I want to talk about finding fulfillment through work. So we already covered the piece about, money will only fulfill you to a certain extent. You might feel really good. Like you said, you'll throw money at someone. They might feel really good. Like, oh, I'm acknowledged. My hard work is acknowledged. But then it's like, there's always that next thing. Like when you come home every day and go to work every day, like what's that deeper fulfillment piece that you need to be fulfilling? I will talk a little bit about what I've been through and to the listeners, this is all just us having like a philosophical conversation. I am in no way an expert in this, but I can really just talk from my own personal experience. There's this concept of superpower. And when you find what your superpower is, now, if you don't know what a superpower is, it is when you have this innate skill. It's a skill that comes naturally to you. It's usually the kind of thing that someone will ask you over and over again to do. So, like your neighbors, your friends, they'll ask you for advice if you're really good at giving advice. For me, it was always, can you draw this for me? Can you create an invitation for me? Can you do graphic design? Everything always led back to design. And I realized like that's my innate skill, and that's going to look different for everyone. And it could be leadership skills and it could be problem solving skills, but everyone's got a superpower. Um, and I think once you find that superpower and you align that with your why, which is the motivating factor that gets you out of bed every day, then you're already creating something pretty cool, like a pretty nice foundation. Does this make sense so far?
Yeah,
Like this is
for
something
sure.
that yeah,
Yeah,
okay,
I think
Rikki
like
approves.
yeah, I think it works in a job also, right? Like, I don't know, I haven't thought so much about the superpower idea, but let's just pick a superpower. Let's say my superpower was talking, which I
Which
know sounds funny.
I think that's good. No, you're a good conversationalist, and also you have a lot of depth to you. I'll tell you that.
Oh, thank you. I liked my parents always make fun of me. They're like, you could talk to a wall, which is true. But
But can we just say that the talking is not empty, baseless talking? It's like
thank
you
you.
have
I appreciate that.
substance and you always have something interesting to bring up. So at
I
least
appreciate
for
that.
that.
Yeah, so I'm saying as a teacher, it's kind of a good job for me,
Yes.
because you get to talk a lot, and the truth is, like, it's a captive audience, they sort of have to listen to me, and I'm hopeful that they enjoy it sometimes. Obviously, when you're in high school, you don't really, want to learn all day, you rather have conversations, but that's still talking, still superpower, but I guess, sometimes you could go into a class and you can be, like, dragging your feet, you're tired, like, it's your 5th class of the day, you're not going in with all your energy and you're just kind of, I don't know, let me think of some group work so I could like sit down for a minute. But if you really take a step back, wait, if my superpower is conversation, and again, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but now that I'm thinking about it, let's use that. Um, then actually, I'm going to have a much better class if I'm engaged in the conversation than if I just kind of like sit back on the side. And the truth is, obviously, teaching comes with so many different pedagogical ideas. Like you're not supposed to stand in front of a classroom and lecture all day. I'm not suggesting that that's a great, educational tool. You're really not, like, that's not the thing to do always. But at the same time, there's a difference between group work that you give to your class and take like a legitimate, like, step back just so that they can do it on their own, and you guide them and you're there and you talk. And then there's this, more of the lazy, work that you give because you don't have a head for it. And the truth is, yes, everybody needs a break once in a while, but if you know your superpower, you're gonna feel fulfilled after a class, then you really use it. So those classes, like, okay, wait, I got a break for like 1 minute, but I didn't feel fulfilled. Why am I doing my job? Like, you have to, that's the funny thing about teaching, at least. I mean, obviously every job is different, but most people don't go into teaching for the money because that's not really present in teaching so much. So most people go into teaching because they love it and they want to give. And then the problem is it could become a job, just like anything could become a job. So
Right.
you so much more have to keep trying to figure out your superpower. I think it in any job, but especially if you do a job because you're passionate about it and not because it makes the big bucks, then you have to keep that passion up. Otherwise, why are you doing what you're doing?
Yeah, and you know what? It's interesting also because having a superpower really isn't enough. Because I was doing graphic design for 15 years. I was using my skill every day for so long, and it wasn't enough to make me feel fulfilled because I realized that I wasn't using my superpower toward fulfilling a greater goal. And if you don't put a goal in the piece, right? So you can use speaking, but if your goal is to motivate people with your speech, then you're fulfilling a goal, then your superpower is being used properly. And I do feel
Interesting.
like, right? So I feel like you could have a superpower, but using it is not enough unless there's a goal aligned with it.
I love
And
that.
that was, but like
That's really
it
cool.
made, thank you.
It's
This is
very
like an
cool.
actual formula that I put together that I help clients with, and I use it on myself. But when your superpower and your why are super clear with a goal attached to it, then you start to feel fulfilled. Like that's where you're generating the fulfillment. And that's why I feel like goal setting is so important, because as long as you have a goal, all you got to do is take the right actions to get there, right? But you got to use your superpower and why in order to get to the goal. It's also important to know who your who is. If you're that teacher with that speech superpower and your goal was to impact them, your who over here would be the students. And it might not have the same impact if you were talking to a different demographic. So it's really important that all these things align. So to the listeners, I'll just repeat that, the formula for fulfillment is your superpower, your why, and your who aligned with your goals. And I think when everything's on the same plane and all heading toward that end goal that you're hoping to achieve, then you will feel really good. And the reason for that is because when there's a goal set in place, you're able to measure whether or not you're achieving and succeeding at the thing you're good at. So for a very long time, I was very robotically doing design, not aware of the fact that I had turned into a robot. I was doing it without a goal. I just woke up every day and did design because that was my job. The day I said, no, I want to help people with this, and I created a very clear cut goal, I attached a financial goal to it. I knew the level of impact I wanted to generate, and I knew how many clients I wanted to book in order to achieve my financial goals. And all of a sudden, I was able to get there, and I was feeling really good about the journey because I knew who I was doing it for. I figured out my demographic, I figured out my market, I figured out why I was doing it. Suddenly, like I had a why. I had no why, I had one. And I was using my skill set to get there. So
Wow.
yeah,
Can't
right.
see, but I've been nodding the whole time. Like, this is really cool.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm very proud of this because it took me so long to figure this out, but better late than never, right?
100%. Yeah.
So this is something I've been implementing in my business for the last, let me think. I started this in like about 2020, 2021. That's when I like set the intention. And that's basically also where I was like, I'm going to start bringing meaning into my life. I'm going to start finding the things that fulfill me, because I realized that it wasn't going to happen for me. I was like really in a rut. It was a very hard time. And I can't even say that there was like one thing that caused me to feel this way, but I think it was just an accumulation of a lot of things where I was, it wasn't even like COVID or anything like that. Like I really hit a wall in 2018, 2019. Um, I just didn't know where to go. I didn't know how to be excited every day, like I wanted to jump out of bed and be like, hooray, like, and I thought I was crazy for wanting that. And thank God I'm there. I wake up like really excited. I check my calendar. I'm like, let's do this because I have the goal, I have the intention set, and I know who I'm showing up for, which is a huge piece. You know who you're showing up for. You're changing lives when you're helping these young women live their life. Like you're setting them up for the future, which is a really big deal.
Yeah. No, I think it's also, it's interesting you say that because I actually taught second and third grade for 1 year and it was not for me. And I couldn't like, yeah, I could tell stories, I could talk to them, but it wasn't working. But I guess my who wasn't there. And that's part of the formula.
Yeah.
And and you know what's also is interesting? Now that I have a son who's in kindergarten, right? I could not talk to a kindergartner before I had a kindergartner, but the goal is very different with my kindergartner. So then that carries the who, I feel like. Do you know what I'm saying? Right? Like with my
Yes.
kindergartner, who's my own kid, I have a very different goal with him as my
Yes.
child. But I couldn't see that. I just didn't feel that that was my superpower mission in second and third grade. With high school, I just feel it so much more. I just feel very attuned. And when I, speak with young women, I teach kalas, I teach brides before they get married. And, I work with young women. So with that also, I feel, it's a passion, it's enjoyable. And I also think it's cool to see them in high school and see them afterwards. Like both age groups are, very fun and different. And I also teach ninth and 12th grade. So even that is a
Wow.
different too. And you get to see what's so beautiful is you get to see so much growth and you kind of get to
Yeah.
see some things that you've done really happen. Like, and also, now that I've been doing this long enough, I have tons of graduates that will text me like, oh, I'm taking this, I teach AP psychology, and they'll text me like, I'm taking this class in college, and I know what they're talking about. I'm so excited. And I'm like, yay, like that makes me feel so happy,
That's
like
great.
it's a good feeling when but I'm going to be honest with you. Do you get that every day? Totally not. Once in a while, I get like the nicest letter from a student, and it like makes my year. But like you don't get that every day. You totally don't. So then you need to find it yourself. Like it's so beautiful when you do get that. And not all students do that, even if they feel it. It's actually funny. I just this year there was a colleague, a new teacher in my school, and I recognized her, and I was like, why do I recognize you? I realized she was my fifth grade teacher, and now I
Wow.
was her colleague. She's my fifth grade Hebrew teacher. And I said, do you remember me? She's like, yeah, you wrote me a letter at the end of the year. I'm like,
Wow.
how do you remember that? And that's so funny. And another teacher sitting there was like, that's so Rikki's style. I'm like, gosh, I guess I haven't changed since fifth grade. But it was funny because I was like, wow, you remember that? How do you remember that? But then I realized, wait, I remember that. I remember every student who ever wrote me a letter, because that reminds you of the fact that you use your superpower, you use your who, you use your why, you did it right. And you don't always get that. But when you get that, I almost feel like you have to make a little box, which I should do. I'm just a little bit too disorganized to do it. But a little box of all the like little things that remind you how you're really fulfilling your purpose. And then when you have those bad days where you're like, am I really doing this for the right reasons? Like, am I going to make it through? Because we all have those days.
Yes.
Look at the little box, and then it reminds you like you're totally like you're doing it. Like,
I love that you're validating the fact that, like, yes, even when we're fulfilled and we're in a good place, that we can have those days where we're not feeling it. I love that you brought that up because it's so true. And you're right. We have to find it on those days. We need to make the extra effort to find it. I love that idea of having that box. I actually have a folder of testimonials that I save. I'm such a
yeah,
nerd.
you would be organized though.
I save them on my phone, and they're like in their own little folder. And sometimes I just need to remind myself, like, I helped somebody, and I did
100%.
that using my superpower, and I did it feeling fulfilled, and I can keep doing that. And there will be another day where I will do it again. And I just got to keep going ahead. Um, but like even in the hard moments, like in the hard days, I keep repeating to myself, I can choose how I react today. I can choose, I can change this day. It doesn't have to be this way. I'm not saying I'm great at this, but it's something at least I'm implementing more and thinking about more, because it matters to me that I really make the most of the moment. Like I don't want a day going to waste. That's probably like I would say my most hated thing is when a day is over and I look back on it and I'm like, it wasn't what I wanted. But then I just use it as a way to tell myself we're not going to let that happen again. We're going to move
Yeah.
forward and, forward. I'm very into forward direction
For
movement.
sure. It's funny. My grandfather, one of the one I was talking about earlier, he had a lot of like pet peeves with certain words. And one of the things he hated was when people say, like, oh, I just need to kill time. He's like, why would you kill time? It's so valuable.
So
And it's
true.
so true. Sometimes it sticks in my head, like I used to hate waiting in a doctor's office. It's the worst thing ever. But in another sense, wow, I have an hour where like no one's bothering me. I don't have anywhere to be. Even if I do have anywhere to be, I'm not being there because, I'm in this doctor's office right now. I can just sit here and I don't know, listen to a podcast or do some work that I needed to catch up on or whatever it is. Like if you are intentional with your time, that's another way, like you won't feel like you're wasting the day. And it's actually interesting that you mentioned the forward thinking, because actually logotherapy is called height psychology, because it's all about height. It's all about forward thinking. And that was kind of the difference until Viktor Frankl came along. Psychoanalysis with Freud, it was crazy. It was like every week, like twice a week for like 5 years. Nobody has the money for that type of therapy, Like
Yeah.
it was a lot of delving into the past. And there's nothing wrong with that. You kind of have to delve into your past and traumas and things like that to move forward. But
Yes.
Viktor Frankl was very into, okay, we got that. We understand that. But now we do still have to move forward. Like we can't spend 5 years talking about your childhood because you don't have money to tell me 5 years worth of your childhood anymore. We got to do like something next. And he even went into prisons, and people didn't want to hear from him originally because every psychologist would say the same thing. And these prisoners, I don't remember the exact story, but I know it was prisoners on death row. So there's not that much to say to a prisoner on death row. You know, they're about to die. And these prisoners really didn't want to hear from any psychologist because, like, what were they going to say that was going to be helpful, you know?
Right.
And Viktor Frankl is the only one. He went into them, he gave them a speech, and not only literally one of the prisoners, I think, actually wrote it up. And he said it was the only speech that ever impacted him because it was forward thinking, and it was still giving them a chance to change an attitude. It was still giving them an opportunity for life in some way, an opportunity to take responsibility, even, right? An opportunity to come to terms with their guilt, instead of just kind of giving them the classic things that psychologists have always said. So I don't know. I think, you know, if it works, the prisoners on death row, he saved so many people who are on the cusp of suicide, because this is real stuff. Meaning isn't like this la-di-da pie in the sky business that like we just want to
Yeah.
like have meaning in life. No, it's real. Like, these people were depressed. They were really contemplating ending their lives. And Viktor Frankl literally sat with them and helped them shift and help them find meaning in whatever it was that they were dealing with or going through, even if it was so small, and it transformed them. So I feel like this whole meaning thing, it gets a bad rep because when you talk about it too much, it just seems like very fluffy, but it's not fluffy. It's so real, you know?
Yeah, people nickname it woo woo, you know, and it's really not at all.
Right.
It's not mystical. It's real, you know, changing your mindset really is so empowering. Wow, Rikki, this was such a great talk. I wish I wish we can keep going. It's past both our bedtimes. We're doing an evening podcast recording. Um, I would love for listeners to get to know more about you and follow you. Where can they find you?
Sure. So on Instagram, I am Rikki Ash Consulting. So CONSOULTING
I'll put it
consult.
in the show notes. We'll make it
Okay,
easy for
fine.
people to
I
just
know.
click.
And the same thing, rikkiashconsulting.com.
I'll make sure people find you. You can check out all the links in the show notes. Rikki, thank you so much. It's been really special speaking with you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.